Hello there. I'd like to introduce you to my crab. You might be wondering how such a charming brachioran could come to be. Well, if you are, then you're in luck, because that's the story I'm going to tell you today. My name is Evan Segelke, and this is the story of how I made my pirate crab, Cap'n Krusty. This little scallywag here was the result of a semester-long project in my stop-motion 2 class. It all started in the first week of my class, when my teacher Dino tasked us to bring in sketches and ideas for puppets we wanted to make. As I was brainstorming, it occurred to me that most of the puppets I've seen other people make in this class had bipedal frames and humanoid silhouettes. This got me wondering, what if I did something completely anatomically different, like a crab? On pitch day, I told Dino Man about my idea, a pirate crab tentatively named Cap'n Krusty, because Dino required us all to name our puppets. Dino responded with something to the effect of, "You had me a pirate crab," so we were off to the races. The first leg of this race was to the Harold Washington Public Library, my beautiful local library right down the street. I went in and picked up all the books on crab anatomy that I could find and get my pincers on, which included Walking Sideways, The Remarkable World of Crabs by Judith S. Weiss, The Biology of Crabs by G. F. Warner, and Lobsters, Crabs, Shrimps, and Their Relatives by Richard Headstrong. I read little bits of these books every week on my work commute to and from the climbing gym, and I got more and more ensnared and immersed in the world of marine crustaceans. Dino would also tease me every week that I brought up the library too much and was probably secretly sponsored by them. But in all truth, I just really like libraries. As I continued to read and draw up new designs, I kept incorporating little bits and pieces from the different crabs I was learning about. Originally, I even planned to have spikes on the side of the crab shell, reminiscent of the blue crab, whose scientific name is Calanectus sapidus, which I did not pronounce right, so it's on screen right now. Though, I eventually had to tweak those out of the design for mobility purposes. One of the favorite things I learned in my crab research was the mating ritual of the fiddler crab. The fiddler crab, if you don't know, has one oversized claw and one smaller claw. The males of the species would look around for a nice spot in the sand and then build a burrow with a nice sand tunnel entrance. Then they'd get outside and they'd start making music with their claw, drumming on the sand and snapping to try and entice females. And I just was really taken by that image. I really like the idea of a little fiddler crab building a sand tunnel and making music for their love. I just like that. For my crab, however, there would be no mating, because I was not going to sculpt crab genitals. No thank you. Instead, I started by sculpting crab legs. Like a dreidel, I sculpted them out of clay. I then added some bumps and ridges reminiscent of a king crab. Then I baked my crab legs, and many jokes were made about baking crab legs and forgetting the butter. And some people might misconstrue from those jokes that I am in some way sponsored by marine culinary institutions like Red Lobster. I am in fact vegetarian and would instead point you to the essay Consider the Lobster by David Foster Wallace for very insightful, entertaining, and quite verbose pondering about marine arthropod consumption. The essay might even be available at your local library. After I baked the legs, I went ahead and built a little box home for them, glued them down, mixed up some silicone, poured it in, and voila! Now I have a reusable silicone crab leg mold to make a bunch of crab legs. I made quite a few resin castings of these crab legs, which you can see here, and there were even the front arms were made using the same resin mold. You may notice, however, that I did shorten the front arms so it would fit and be a little bit more proportional to what I was looking for. To finish off the legs, I drilled holes in them and then stuffed some lashed together wires that I JB Quicked into place. The main crab claw itself was also sculpted out of clay, and since there was only going to be one of them, I didn't need to do any of that silicone or resin stuff. It was perfect just the way it was. Then, for the main crab carapace, I was reunited with one of my favorite sculpting materials that I used in Stop Motion 1, which is Warbler. My teacher Dino once again gave me a bunch of scraps left over from his other projects, and I got to work with a heat gun, morphing it into shape. Now I'm going to backtrack a little bit and tell you about the wheel. The wheel idea first started around the first or second week of class when me and my buddy Josh were joking around and tossing around the idea of making my crab into an amputee with wheels for legs because it might be a lot easier to animate. But I took that joke a little too seriously and started brainstorming that a pirate wheel could replace half the legs, look cool, and save me a lot of time and work when I'm animating, and that's what I ended up doing. Now, having actually animated the puppet, I can confirm the wheel was a big time saver. The other legs were much more complicated and difficult, and one of them even broke on set, whereas this piece was very solid and sturdy. There are only a handful of 3D printed pieces on my puppet, and the largest, of course, is the wheel itself, which was originally a design we found on Thingiverse, me and Dino, that was supposed to be a pirate wheel fidget spinner. And we scaled it up and removed all the fidget spinner innards and instead made a cylindrical hole, which I inserted a wooden dowel into, and I had to sand down the dowel so it would be a really snug, tight fit because the dowel was a little bit bigger than the hole. But then it's so snug and tight that I don't actually need any adhesives, and it's just held together by the tension of that snug fit. To attach all the main leg and arm pieces to the crab itself, I made some measurements, and Dino took those measurements and cut a piece of wood for me, and then I drilled a bunch of holes into the wood, snaked the wires that were coming off the legs through the holes in the wood, and then JB Quick them to the underside so it'd be nice and snug and secure. The next step was to use this program called Tinkercad to model some attachments for the wheel and the jump rig. And then once those were finished, I sent the files over to Dino and he printed them on his 3D printer. Once I got all the attachment pieces screwed down to the wood itself, I was able to stick the wheel in, and the crab really started to take shape. It was getting very crabby, and I was very excited. You may notice that the claw has some discolorations in this picture. And all those discolorations were from when I drilled a hole into the crab claw and it cracked and broke off because it's very fragile and small. The reason I drilled a hole into the crab claw was to make space for a wire that I could then feed into a posable dactylus piece for the crab claw. But as I said, it's very fragile, and so it broke apart, and I had to mix up some epoxy putty and slap it on there, smooth it over, and we're good as new. Back to a functional crab claw. Once everything was patched up, I JB Quicked the wires in place, and crab-a-doodle-doo, I've got a posable crab claw now. This is around the time when I also reshaped the crab carapace, or top shell, because the spines pointing out the sides were getting in the way of the legs, and it wasn't properly fitting onto the top, so I had to finesse it and finagle it into the right shape and sculpt some holes for the legs to stick out of. Then once the carapace was all finished and fit snugly, the crab looked a little less naked and a little more crab-like. After that, I started work on the hooks. As you notice, the finished crab has a special threaded screw receptacle on this arm. The cannon was the first one I built, and it was honestly quite easy compared to everything else I did on this project. I sculpted the cannon shape, baked it, no more jokes about buttering up crab legs, and then I drilled some holes into the front and back. This one's where the screw attaches, this one's for decoration since it's a cannon. Then I JB Quicked the actual sawed off screw piece into the back part, and I was able to screw the cannon in place, and my crab was armed and dangerous. At this point, my crab had all the walking legs and prosthetic appendages, but he was still missing a lot in the face region. So I started out by making some eyes out of clay and sticking them onto different sized wires and finding the wires that were thin but still sturdy enough to actually support the weight of the clay eyes because they were kind of heavy, relatively speaking. Once I ironed out all those details, I moved on to the crab mandibles, which are those mouth flap crusher thingies, which I made out of my favorite material, Warbler, and some copper wires. The crowning jewel of my crab's facial features is his posable foam mustache. I believe my teacher Dino says it best: I'm always ready for more facial hair, even on crustaceans. I even made this little pirate hat out of warbless crabs, which I'm very happy with how it turned out. The last piece I actually sculpted by hand was probably the crab abdomen down below, or crabdomen, if you will, which I also sculpted out of Warbler. The final printed piece I made was the hook, which I again modeled in Tinkercad, sent over to Dino, who 3D printed it, and then I had to drill into it to fit in the screw attachment. And it was also a little bit fragile, and broke on set, and it had to be hot glued back down, and then broke again because it's very fragile. Next, it was time to get deep in the paint. I started with a white primer layer on the crab that made it look like a crustacean version of Mr. Clean. Next, it was time to get into the real colors. For the wheel, that meant brown, and then more brown, to give it a layered woody color. Obviously, I used different shades of brown. And for the crab himself, I used purple. And you might be thinking, do crabs even come in purple? They actually do. I based the color scheme of purple and orange off of a real-life crab called the Palawan crab, found in a specific region of the Philippines, specifically the Palawan province. In a sense, this makes my crab Filipino. I initially painted the hook and the cannon to be silver and gold, but I really didn't want this to be gold. I wanted it to be more of a bronze. So I mixed the gold with a bit of an orange and got a bronzy color that I'm pretty happy with. Then I painted all the little details on my crab's face. Painted the eyes purple and black, and then spray painted it with a layer of gloss. Painted the mandibles purple and a darker shade of purple on the inside. And then the mustache I painted purple with puff paint and used black puff paint to make some rings around the mustache and make it appear like it was a segmented crab appendage sticking out of the face. Once all the little face bits were painted, I was able to attach them with JB Quick. Once again, JB Quick shows up a lot in this building process. I specifically attached the eye stalks in this loopy orientation so that they can be extended and retracted through the drilled holes in the face. Once the crab was painted, my friend Josh and I took a little stroll on over to the local pet store in search of props. But we had a little bit of an adventure trying to just find the entrance to the pet store because of some very strange architectural decisions. We searched the entire interior of a local shopping center, couldn't find the entrance to the pet store. Eventually we found it. It was in the subterranean level of the adjoining parking structure. I don't know why it was designed that way. Very strange, in my opinion. Once we were in there though, we finally got ourselves to the aquarium section and started searching around for cool looking props that were within our budget. Once we got all those props, we started building a stage back at the Stop-Mo lab. You can see all the finished props here, as well as the squizzard for scale, and you might notice there's sand all over the floor because we borrowed sand from the Alternative Strategies lab next door. Now, it was the home stretch, doing some final touch-ups on the crab. My teacher Dino had a really good last-minute suggestion to paint the crab with some layering to the purple instead of it just being one solid color. So I went back and looked at Palawan crab pictures and noticed that the top of the crab tends to be a darker purple, so I painted the top of the crab a darker purple, and the bottom of the crab tends to be a light purple. So I did a lighter shade of purple on the bottom of all the arms and the crabdomen, and then I added a gradient purple transition to the claw using some blocks of foams to sponge it on there so it looks kind of like speckly. Oh, one last little detail is the tips of the walking legs are orange as well. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the resulting paint job. I like how it looks. And there we go. Finished painted crab. In total for this crab, there were 12 cast resin leg segments. There were 3 total walking legs. There are 2 pincer arms, 1 big old wheel attachment, 2 eye stalks, 2 mandibles, and of course the crab hat. And the piece de resistance, the posable crab mustache. What a trek it was to build my little crab. But remember, I said this was a semester-long build, and building the crab is only one part of the journey. I had to actually animate him to have an animated finished film. So I finished the crab, and I had less than a week left in school before I moved out of Chicago. Thankfully though, I didn't have any other really demanding classwork, so I just buckled down and started crabbing hard. I had actually made a storyboard animatic a few weeks earlier that I sent to both Dino and Josh, my collaborators on this project, to see what they thought. And they both seemed happy with it, and so we used that as the rough base for the project we were going to shoot. I went ahead and made that into a shot list to help organize myself so that I could really get this done within that 5-day time frame I was working with. I think the most memorable workday for me was when I went into the stop motion lab at about 10 or 11 a.m. in the morning with a yoga mat and some snacks, and then just kept animating until 9:30 p.m. Of course, taking breaks for things like food, stretching, yoga, burritos, the essentials. I'm happy to report that Josh and I were able to do it. We finished all the shots we needed to in that time frame, and now we're just into the post-production phase, polishing it up, painting out the jump rigs, all that good stuff. And stay tuned. For anyone going to Columbia College Chicago's Manifest screening in 2025, we're currently in the works of getting our short film called Captain Crusty vs. the Squizzard into the animation showcase at the end of the year, alongside all the other animation production studio films and solo films. That's really all I have to share for now, but thank you for joining me on this strange and crabulous tale about how I built my lovely little guy here. Thank you very much. Take care. Infinite Jest update. I'm on page 534. Been reading it since this summer. I'm dyslexic. It's gonna be a long time.